of the U.S. Office of Government Ethics, Walter Shaub, and he is leaving now to go on the outside and work for change on the inside of government. Walter, it's good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. It's my first morning as a private citizen, so this is a new experience.
How does it feel?
You know, it's a relief. It's been a hard 8 months. We started working with the new administration right after the election, and pretty much immediately there's been a departure from the ethical norms that have really held our ethics program together for all these years.
Make the case. People will say, these are all nonsense questions. Trump put out his FEC filing. It's all there. There's nothing to know. There are no conflicts. We hired a businessman. We knew that the family would be making money while they were in office. There are no ethical considerations.
You know, there's a lot of ethical considerations, and there's a lot of conflicts of interest. Anytime you have vast holdings while you're in a position of public trust, we've got to worry about whether you're making your decisions based on your policy aims or based on your personal financial interests. In this case, we can't know that because he's continuing to hold his financial interests despite what every president since the enactment of the Ethics in Government Act in the 1970s did. And you see him giving free advertisements to his properties when he travels there. They double the membership fee down in Florida at his resort there. And these things matter because we have to be able to have the American people trust that government decision making is made on their behalf, not on our own behalf as government officials. And conflicts of interest have a real consequence. People get hurt when decisions are made. Imagine you had a doctor who's getting paid by the drug company to prescribe for you a drug when some other drug might have been better for you. The reality is these conflicts exist whether they're illegal or not, and presidents have known that. It also sets a tone problem because you need to set a strong ethical tone from the top. Tone is everything in government ethics, and what your appointees do is going to follow what you do. And we've seen a number of incidents that I've tried to highlight over the past several months where they're not following the traditional ethical tone and behaving in the way government officials always behave. And that has really hurt us along the way.
And it drives your curiosity about all these Russia questions as well, does it not? That why has the president postured so apparently sympathetic to Russian President Putin? Why would these Russian operative types seek out Donald Jr. for a meeting to talk about relieving, at best reading of what that meeting was about? Talking about adoption is not really about the Magnitsky Act. It's about the sanctions. It's about Putin's money being tied up by the U.S. government. Why would they seek out Trump's son and other Trump officials? These questions, in your mind, raise further questions about what we know about the holdings and the lack of transparency.
Well, and that's right. And you can add to that list foreign governments rescheduling events to appear at his hotel instead of somewhere else, or businesses and charities and politicians going there. It gives the appearance of profiting from the presidency. And as you point out, it leaves us not knowing what is going on in what is behind these interactions with the Russians. Now, some of his supporters have said, well, it's just too much to ask to have to give up certain financial interests and maybe be a little bit less rich. But I'd give you the example of Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of the Department of Commerce. This is an equally wealthy man who has given up a great deal of his holdings in order to come into government, and that happens across the top level of government. I've spent almost a decade and a half. Well, actually, I have spent a decade and a half delivering the bad news to cabinet officials and top presidential appointees that they have to sell off their assets, sometimes at a loss, and that's the price of public service. And it hasn't been easy and it hasn't been fun to tell them that, but their basic patriotism prevails and they always do it. So I don't know why the president would be held to a lower standard than the people who work for him.
Well, the main reason winds up being that when you look at members of Congress, at least, they have explicit guidelines they're supposed to follow in terms of their holdings. The executive does not. We've never really dealt with that in the modern era because we haven't had ridiculously wealthy people. And I say that as a positive. You just haven't had a businessman like Trump in the presidency before. But in your experience, how would you judge the amount of transparency and disclosure by this administration?
Well, I mean, I'll give him credit that he filed his financial disclosure form voluntarily this year, as past presidents have done. So at least that's one tradition that he stuck to. I was horrified when I sat across the table from his attorney and she asked me if he could file it without signing it to certify that it's true. I pointed out to her that millions of financial disclosure reports have been filed in the past 4 decades, and every one of them has been certified as true, and I think we could ask that of our president.
His lawyer asked you if he didn't have to sign it to certify it as true. Under what basis? Why did she want that?
Well, she said the filing's voluntary and he doesn't have to file it if he doesn't want to. And I said, well, that's fine. Either don't file it or file it and just release it unsigned. But if you want OGE to certify it, which they wanted done, it's going to have to follow the normal rules.
Did he sign it?
Yeah, he did sign it. But then you also have the tax forms that are not released. Now, they're not currently required to be released, and that's something I'd like to see changed, because I think it's like going out and buying anything. People need to be able to evaluate what kinds of conflicts of interest their presidential candidate has. And this story that people knew what they were getting, well, they didn't know what they were getting because he didn't release his tax forms the way every other presidential candidate did.
Let me ask you something. Do you have any proof that the president is under audit and that's why he can't release his taxes?
Well, you know, OGE, the Office of Government Ethics where I worked, isn't involved in processing tax forms. So I don't have proof, but to be fair, I wouldn't expect to have proof because that's not really our bailiwick.
So that was unusual to have the lawyer come forward to you and say he doesn't want to sign it for purposes of certainty, you know, that he's certifying that all of this is true. How did you process that? Had you ever been asked that before?
No.
By anybody at any level? I'll give you the paperwork, but I don't want to sign it just in case it's not accurate?
No, it was truly the weirdest moment of my entire career. I practically had to pinch myself to make sure I was awake. I thought this is the embodiment of exactly how far we've departed from the ethical norms that the American people are entitled to expect their leaders to live up to.
How long did it take for you to get the signed paperwork back?
Well, again, to be fair, it takes a while because we work with them behind the scenes to make sure the disclosure meets, at least apparently on its face, meets the very complex disclosure requirements. So I don't have any complaints about the back and forth over his report, except for that.
Did you then take the time to scrutinize the filing?
Yeah, we did. And the truth is, we've dealt with a lot of wealthy people in government before, so my staff, or my former staff, is well experienced at that. Although I will say we've been used to dealing with people who have hedge funds or other type of investments that you see wealthy people on Wall Street holding. The world of real estate is an entirely new thing in that there are all these strange shell companies that don't hold anything, and you feel like you're sifting through a shell game. This was my first encounter with a large number of people, well, not a large number of people, but a few people from the real estate world. And I got to be honest with you, I don't think we know 100% for sure that we understand what all of the underlying holdings are at OGE, but it met the disclosure requirements, and you know, technically the conflict of interest laws don't apply, even though presidents have always followed them. And so we had to certify the report because it, you know, was good enough from a disclosure standpoint to meet the legal requirements, but I'm not sure that we fully understood everything in it.
Wow. What a proposition, that it meets the standard, but you're not sure you know what you're talking about after certifying it. Well,
Yeah,
Mr. Schaub, now you will be on the outside as a private citizen. Let's see what change you can promote from that perspective. Thank you for me. All right, so you're going to be hearing about this second meeting between Putin and President Trump. Why does it matter? Well, first, we didn't know about it. There were no U.S. officials there reportedly. There wasn't even a translator for the American president. Why? Well, because he was sitting next to the Japanese head of state. And so he had a Japanese translator who couldn't translate into Russian. So when he got up to go over and talk to Vladimir Putin, he went alone. Okay? What did this meeting mean in terms of sparking interest? This isn't just about the media. This was about how other G20 leaders saw it. Pull up the excerpt from the New York Times. The dinner discussion caught the attention of other leaders around the table, some of whom later remarked privately on the odd spectacle of an American president seeming to single out the Russian leader for special attention at a summit meeting that included some of the United States' staunchest, oldest allies. So let's discuss with CNN military and diplomatic analyst Rear Admiral John Kirby and former U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Ambassador Nicholas Burns. Ambassador, help us understand. Give us some perspective. The president seemed to have a little bit of a misunderstanding of the reporting here. He said it was sick to suggest that there was some private dinner for just him and Putin. No one certainly is reporting that here. This is just about, at a big G20 dinner, that the president of the United States got up unattended and went over to talk to the Russian president and the Russian president's translator. Does this raise your eyebrows?
Chris, I don't think the fact of the meeting is a problem. We should want these two guys to get to know each other and have an effective relationship. They're the two most powerful people in the world. He should have had our own translator with him. They should have understood that he wanted to have this conversation. You want a record of the conversation. The real problem is his weakness, the weakness of President Trump towards Russia, because they hacked our election and the president hasn't done anything about it. So the real test is, will this administration now support a big sanctions bill against Russia that Congress is debating? I think it's the policies that are the problem here. President Trump seems to be running after Putin, chasing some kind of illusory good relationship when the Russians are occupying half of Ukraine, when they've hacked our election, when they're a big problem for us in the Middle East. I think that's where the focus of the president should be, to be tougher with Putin at the beginning of this relationship.
All right, so let's dig down into this a little bit, though, John. If we don't know what happened during the meeting, how do we know whether or not the president may have been dropping the hammer on Putin about sanctions? We don't know.
Yeah, that's a concern of mine too, and I think this gets to the ambassador's point about the policies toward Russia. They're so opaque and they are weak, and we don't know a lot of where this is all going. And so now we have an hour-long meeting with Putin that we don't have a record of, and we also don't know, because he didn't have his translator, we don't know if what he said to Putin was actually translated accurately, or so what impressions Putin walked away from. So I am concerned about this. I mean, I agree that they meeting, it's a good thing. These pull-asides happen all the time at these international conferences, but that it was so unprepared for, and that we have no record of it, that is a concern.
Well, why is it a concern, though, Ambassador? It seems that every time this issue comes up, the American people seem pretty unanimous in saying, look, anything that gives us a better relationship with Russia, that's a good thing. This hard line hasn't worked anyway. They're still in Ukraine, as you point out. They still do whatever they want in Syria. So Trump campaigned on. Putin likes Trump. Trump will use that to forge a better relationship. Why isn't this meeting just an extension of that effort?
You know, Chris, I'm not sure that the American people, the average American, the majority of Americans, support a weak policy towards Russia. We need to be effective in the world. We're the global leader, and we need to stand up for NATO. So President Trump has to be careful here. The issue that he has chosen as president and as presidential candidate to be his signature foreign policy issue, I'll make a better relationship with Russia, he's not playing it correctly. Putin's been 18 years in this game. He's very tough-minded, and he's very cynical. And the way I think that we've dealt successfully with him in the past, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, and President Obama, is you have to draw the line. You have to show Putin where he can't go. And President Trump has not done that. And I think you're seeing a rebellion by senior Republicans in the Senate who want this sanction bill to pass. They voted 97-2 to pass it. The Trump administration is now trying to water it down in the House. I think that's where the drama is going to be, and that's where the Trump administration has to give smart. If you give to Putin, he's going to take. If you let him hack your election with no penalty in return, he'll do it again in the 2018 midterms.
Now, look, I get that concern, John Kirby, of that there may be an effort to soften the position on Russia that feeds into the anxiety about this Donald Jr. meeting, where he may have been pitched a softer approach on certain issues of Russian sensitivity. But how do we know that the desire of this administration is to go easier on Russia? Where is the proof of that, John?
Well, I think it's just evident in all the things that they haven't done with Russia and the things that they've said, the failure to disclose these contacts. All of that is a mounting body of evidence, Chris, that they, while they say they want better relations with Russia, they seem to be willing to pursue those relations at almost no cost to the Russians, and certainly at any avenue here in the United States. I don't think. I think it's obvious that there's something special here going on between these two, and we don't necessarily know what it is, but we are definitely not seeming to prove able to hold Russia to account for all the destabilizing activities that they continue to conduct.
Well, one thing is for sure. For the second time now, Ambassador, final word to you. We've had a meeting between the American president and the leader of Russia in which we don't have a transcript of it. We don't know exactly what happened, so it is impossible to vet the conversation.
Well, and it's impossible for Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis to be able to do their jobs. They're the ones who have to carry most of the water here with the Russians. They need to know exactly what did Putin say? What did he commit to? What did our guys say? That's why you need, as the Admiral is saying, at least your own interpreter or some kind of note taker. This is not an inconsequential relationship. They should have planned for this.
But also, just let's remind people, Donald Trump has a long history of conducting meetings on his own and by himself. This may be an adjustment to the presidency. We'll have to see what comes out of what he says this meeting was about. I see you shaking your head, John. I get it, that it's not the right way to do it, but it's the way he's done it in the past. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the perspective. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Allison.
Chris.
So, Chris, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is not getting any love in the polls. We are getting a closer look at President Trump's tumultuous relationship with a key figure in his administration, Steve Bannon. The new book is called Devil's Bargain, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump, and the Storming of the Presidency. It documents everything from Trump Tower on election night to the explosive fights inside the White House. The author, Josh Green, joins us now to share more. Josh, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, what a book you have. I would say this is the most in-depth look at Steve Bannon, who is a sort of mystery man.
Well, the goal of this book was to be the first full accounting of the election, of what really happened, but especially about the relationship between Trump and Bannon, because Bannon is such an odd figure who suddenly emerged on the stage, and I argue in the book was really key to Trump's win.
So let's look at some anecdotes that help us get a window into him. Number one, election night. What happened inside Trump Tower? By all accounts, they were surprised by Donald Trump's win. So surprised, is it true they did not have a victory speech ready?
No, traditionally, a politician's staff will have two options. You write a victory speech ahead of time, you write a concession speech, and you pull out whichever one you need. Bannon knew that Trump was so superstitious that he would not want to go through that exercise, and so nobody ever brought it up. And so come about 10:30 on election night, it's clear that Trump is going to be the next president. And so Bannon kind of nudges him and says, hey, shouldn't we go upstairs and write a victory speech? And so they all headed up to Trump's penthouse and cranked one out.
And who is Steve Bannon? How do you describe him?
I describe Bannon as almost this Zelig figure who has had the strangest life. He started out in the Navy. He went to Harvard Business School. He was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs in the go-go 1980s. Wound up in Hollywood doing film financing and eventually became a conservative documentarian, a conservative filmmaker, which brought him into the orbit of Andrew Breitbart, the late conservative publisher. And Bannon wound up taking over Breitbart News in 2012 after Breitbart died.
Because that became his worldview. His worldview became this sort of America First, anti-global, anti-kind of, is it fair to say anti-other?
Absolutely fair to say, yeah. I mean, Bannon had always had these nationalist, populist politics and a real anger, I think, at liberal secular culture. And what Breitbart did, what Andrew Breitbart did, was to try and start a small publication that would fight back against the media. Bannon took that over and really used it as a vehicle to push his ideas into national politics and elevate politicians like Donald Trump, who he thought could carry that message.
Let's talk about that, because you also say that Bannon had been looking for basically a vessel, and he had worked with Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, Jeff Sessions, but not until he found Donald Trump was it this sort of match made in Bannon heaven. So what was it about Donald Trump that allowed this symmetry to happen?
What it was Trump's great personal force. I mean, Bannon was introduced to him way back in 2010 and began kind of informally advising him, but nobody, including Bannon, thought Trump was actually seriously going to run for president until years later. But when he did, Bannon was always involved in his campaign long before he joined, behind the scenes. He was feeding Trump Breitbart News articles. He helped arrange Trump's trip to the Mexico border right after his announcement that caused such chaos and controversy.
And while we're on that topic, there's something reporting that you found about how the concept of the border wall came to pass.
The story of the border wall is terrific. It's one of Trump's greatest hits, but it wasn't Trump's idea. Two of his staffers, Sam Nunberg and Roger Stone, came up with it as a device to keep Trump, whose attention famously wanders, focused on the issue of immigration reform because they thought that was so important. So Trump tried it out at a speech in Iowa. The crowd responded. And this is the way Trump works.
But they came up with a four-letter word, wall, that he, as a real estate magnate, understood it was concrete, literally and figuratively, so he could hold on to that.
When Trump was a builder, and he saw the wall thing start to resonate, and so he started to improvise and say, I'm going to build a wall, and nobody builds like Trump. I'm going to build a wall, and Mexico is going to pay for it. And the crowd went wild. It became Trump's greatest hit on the campaign trail.
There have been a lot of questions about what happened to Chris Christie. He was an ally of Donald Trump. They were often seen together. And then you have an anecdote here about election night and what happened. You write in the book that basically Chris Christie said, I've just spoken to President Obama when it was clear that Trump was going to win, and he's going to call my cell phone, and I'm going to hand it to you, Mr. President-elect, to talk to President Obama. Donald Trump did not like
Christie, and that really was the moment when Christie began to drift out of Trump's inner orbit.
Yeah, Chris Christie refutes this, by the way. He was just on another show. Do we have this, guys, of Chris Christie's? Okay, listen to what Governor Christie has said about this moment.
The book is wrong fundamentally, and there was no call from President Obama that evening to me. I didn't speak to the president that night at all.
Your response?
No disagreement there. All I said was that he tried to arrange the call, and he talked about it.
But didn't you say that Chris Christie had actually had a conversation? Chris Christie said he had had a conversation with President Obama.
No, with Obama's staff. He said he arranged for Obama, if Trump won, that Obama would call Christie's cell phone. But that never happened.
So he's parsing it to say that that whole exchange
He's
never
giving
happened.
what in politics is called a non-denial denial.
I see. So Steve Bannon, back to him. Is he, you know, people, obviously Democrats and liberals call him the puppet master and think that he sort of functions as Donald Trump's brain. What's your take?
I don't think that take is quite right. Bannon has a lot of influence and a lot of ideas, and he helped shape Trump's politics during his run for president. But what Bannon really is a soldier. And I tell different stories in the book: the fight between Donald Trump and Megyn Kelly, the fight with the media over the Access Hollywood tape. At every pivotal moment in the campaign, Bannon was the guy there fighting on Trump's behalf, even when other people like House Speaker Paul Ryan or other Republican leaders abandoned Trump. When people thought his campaign was headed toward an epic loss.
There's a particular passage from the book that I want to read about Paul Ryan and about Steve Bannon's take on Paul Ryan, and it's colorful. So I
say this on the air?
Well, I'm going to fudge this. Watch how I do this. The possibility, however remote, that Paul Ryan might steal the nomination from Trump sent Bannon into a panic of his own. Ryan, he fumed, was a limp, blanked mother blank who was born in a petri dish at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank too close to the globalist donor class for Bannon's taste.
So here's the context. In the spring of 2016, when it became clear to everybody that Donald Trump was going to win the nomination, the Republican Party went into a panic. How can we stop him? One idea that came up was the idea that there would be a deadlocked convention and that maybe Paul Ryan could come galloping in as a white knight candidate. This was Steve Bannon's nightmare, and I happened to be sitting with him as all this was going down because I wanted to write a story about what he was going to do. And as I sat there with the tape recorder running, Bannon just exploded at Ryan because he thought that he was going to steal the nomination from Bannon's candidate, Donald Trump.
Very quickly, how are these two men getting along now, Bannon and Trump?
I think they have an up-down relationship like everybody does in Trump's inner orbit. From everything I have heard, Bannon is back in high esteem, partly due to the fact that Trump once again needs a defender because of the Russia probe.
Josh Green, the book is Devil's Bargain. It's a great read. Thanks so much for sharing it with us. Thanks to our international viewers for watching. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. For our U.S. viewers, we're talking to lawmakers at the center of this healthcare debate. New Day continues right now.
There's only three people that really know what was said in that meeting: Presidents Trump, Putin, and the Russian interpreter.
This kind of private meeting is virtually unprecedented.
If every single time something like this happens, the dial gets turned to 11, people just don't buy it.
Kavaladze has now been thrust into the spotlight as the mystery eighth person at the Trump Tower meeting.
He's a private individual who had a very tangential role in this meeting.
I'm certainly disappointed. Let Obamacare fail. It'll be a lot easier.
The president is playing a dangerous game.
Hopefully, with the collapse of the program, they'll be more willing to come to the table and help clean up the mess.
You got a president who says, let me do nothing. Let me sabotage the current system. And so what if millions of people suffer? That is really awful.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
Good morning. Welcome to your New Day. Up first, President Trump slamming the media as dishonest as the White House downplays reports that Mr. Trump and Vladimir Putin had a second undisclosed meeting at the G20 summit. That is 100% true. You'll remember the intense scrutiny of their initial meeting. So the question becomes, why didn't we know that the president got up at a G20 dinner and spoke to the Russian leader for about an hour without any American officials present, which means there's no transcript and no understanding of what was discussed.
And this morning, we're also learning more about the eighth person in that Trump Tower meeting between Trump campaign officials and the Russians. The eighth person, now identified, that man is catching the attention of a former senator who is speaking out about this situation. All of this as the president tries to save face on health care, calling all Republican senators to the White House today for a lunch. So we have it all covered for you. Let's begin with CNN's Joe Johns. He is live at the White House. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Allison. President Trump's 2-hour meeting with Vladimir Putin was one of the most closely scrutinized moments of his presidency so far. And now we know there was yet another meeting. The White House confirming that after reports of it first surfaced in the news media.
President Trump lashing out, calling coverage of his previously undisclosed second meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin sick and alleging it's been made to look sinister. A senior White House official tells CNN the discussion on the sidelines of a G20 dinner lasted nearly an hour and no other U.S. officials were present. Ignoring protocol, the president relied on a Russian translator, leaving the U.S. with no official record of their conversation. The White House downplaying the second encounter, asserting the insinuation that the White House has tried to hide a second meeting is false, malicious, and absurd. This new revelation, the latest in a string of undisclosed meetings between Trump associates and Russians.
This kind of private meeting is virtually unprecedented in the diplomatic world. There seems to be a pattern of reckless or willful concealment of contacts with the Russians.
This meeting coming to light as CNN learns new details about the eighth person in attendance at the June 2016 meeting where top Trump aides hope to get damaging information about Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. That man, Ike Kavaladze, seen behind the president in 2013 in this exclusive video obtained by CNN, is a senior vice president at a real estate development company run by Russian oligarch Aris Agalarov, who has ties to Putin.
There was absolutely no conversation between either Agalarov and the Russian prosecutors or the Russian government about Hillary Clinton or the U.S. campaign ever. Didn't happen.
According to his attorney, Kavaladze believed he was attending a meeting as a translator for a Russian lawyer, despite the fact that she brought a translator with her. In 2000, Kavaladze was linked to U.S. bank accounts that came under congressional investigation for possible money laundering on behalf of Russian brokers. He was not charged.
This individual who's at least had a colorful past, if not a potentially criminal, It is very strange to me that this meeting that was supposed to be originally was related as 3 or 4 people about Russian adoptions.
And some information that is new this morning. Reuters reporting that the Russian lawyer who met with Donald Trump is now offering to testify before.
With Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day. It is Wednesday, July 19th, 6 o'clock here in New York. Here is our starting line. The White House downplaying reports that President Trump and Vladimir Putin had a second undisclosed meeting at the G20 summit that lasted about an hour. Given the intense scrutiny on their first meeting, why did they meet again without any American officials present? CNN is the way for the president's son and Paul Manafort to testify in public before Congress.
President Trump says it's probably time to just let Obamacare fail after suffering a humiliating collapse of the Senate's health plan. The president is now inviting all 52 Republican senators over for lunch today at the White House to discuss what's next. And for the first time today, the president's Election Integrity Commission is going to meet as top Democrats sent a letter to the vice president demanding that the vice chair of that panel step down. We have it all covered for you. Let's begin with CNN's Joe Johns live at the White House. Joe.
Good morning, Chris. President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin was one of the most closely scrutinized events of his young presidency, and now we know there was a second meeting. The White House confirming that second encounter after reports of it surfaced in the media.
President Trump lashing out, calling coverage of his previously undisclosed second meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin sick and alleging it's been made to look sinister. A senior White House official tells CNN the discussion on the sidelines of a G20 dinner lasted nearly an hour and no other U.S. officials were present. Ignoring protocol, the president relied on a Russian translator, leaving the U.S. with no official record of their conversation. The White House downplaying the second encounter, asserting the insinuation that the White House has tried to hide a second meeting is false, malicious, and absurd. This new revelation, the latest in a string of undisclosed meetings between Trump associates and Russians.
This kind of private meeting is virtually unprecedented in the diplomatic world. There seems to be a pattern of reckless or willful concealment of contacts with the Russians.
This meeting coming to light as CNN learns new details about the 8th person in attendance at the June 2016 meeting where top Trump aides hope to get damaging information about Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. That man, Ike Kavaladze, seen behind the president in 2013 in this exclusive video obtained by CNN, is a senior vice president at a real estate development company run by Russian oligarch Aris Agalarov, who has ties to Putin.
There was absolutely no conversation between either Agalarov and the Russian prosecutors or the Russian government about Hillary Clinton or the U.S. campaign ever. Didn't happen.
According to his attorney, Kavaladze believed he was attending a meeting as a translator for a Russian lawyer, despite the fact that she brought a translator with her. In 2000, Kavaladze was linked to U.S. bank accounts that came under congressional investigation for possible money laundering on behalf of Russian brokers. He was not charged.
This individual who's at least had a colorful past, if not a potentially criminal, it is very strange to me that this meeting that was supposed to be originally was related as 3 or 4 people about Russian adoptions.
And new this morning, Reuters reports that the Russian lawyer who met with Donald Trump last year, 2016, has offered to testify before Congress, citing hysteria over the encounter. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein has told CNN that special counsel Robert Mueller has given the green light for 2 people to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee. That would be Donald Trump Jr. and former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, though it's not clear when that could actually happen. Allison, Chris, back to you.
Okay, Joe, thank you for all of that information. Let's bring in our political panel to discuss it. We have CNN political analysts David Gregory and John Avlon, and CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large Chris Cillizza. Great to see
What a
all
bunch of
of you.
heavyweights we have this morning.
Absolutely, in
There must
studio.
be something important going on.
Chris Cillizza, wait, you can't come up from D.C.?
I know, sorry. So I
He
didn't
says
get the
coming
memo.
to New York is not the point. Always pushing his new product.
Yes.
David, let's talk about this previously undisclosed, possibly hour-long meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin that there's no official U.S. record of. What are we to think of this?
Well, look, I don't like it. I think, anybody who's covered the White House as I have, the president who does things in the name of the American people should be transparent. And certainly when you're being investigated for improperly having, cooperation or collusion or contacts during the campaign with the Russians, I don't think it's appropriate. I think this is another example where the president must think, oh, look, I can just, forge this relationship. I can make it work. Not understanding that Putin is an enemy of the United States, is manipulating and has manipulated U.S. leaders. And let's find out exactly what they talked about. I'm interested to find out whether the president's going to get tough with Putin for attacking America during the campaign. There's no evidence of that. The previous president had in place countermeasures that he could have used. Instead, they're now having, the 2-hour meeting and then a separate meeting. And the president's position seems to be, well, look, he said he didn't do it. So what am I going to do? Get into a fist fight if we disagree? That to me, that's not good enough. So that's why I don't like it.
And just to be clear, the president took on this reporting, calling it fake, but there seemed to be a misunderstanding on his part of what the reporting is. There is not a report, as far as we know, that there was a separate dinner between the president and the Russian leader. It's just that at a G20 dinner, the president got up and went over and sat next to Putin on his own accord for about an hour. That's the reporting, so let's deal with that. The pushback is, John, he's the president of the United States. This is what he does. On his own whim, he will go and talk to whomever he wants, whenever he wants. That's why he was elected, to create relationships, forge deals, and he doesn't have to tell you anything.
Yeah, that's not why he was elected or core part of the job. When an American president sits down with a Russian president, that's news. That's high-level negotiation, even if it's under the auspices of something social. But what's really sick, to use the president's word about this, is the idea that they developed a great rapport talking about Russian interference in the American election. That shouldn't develop a rapport. That should get one's back up, and there should be a follow-through. There should be consequences, to David's point. But if there isn't, and there's no reason to think there is, that's why questions keep getting raised about possible collusion between the Trumps and the Russians. And this kind of a belated report doesn't do anything to stop that. It only accelerates it.
Chris Cillizza, here's the White House statement that they put out yesterday about this. There was no second meeting between President Trump and President Putin, just a brief conversation at the end of a dinner. The insinuation that the White House has tried to hide a second meeting is false, malicious, and absurd. It is not merely perfectly normal. It is part of the president's duties to interact with world leaders. I mean, it's true that they weren't hiding. They were in plain sight at this dinner hosted by Angela Merkel, but we don't know anything about the content of what they said.
Two things. One, no one said they were hiding. I mean, this is the problem. Donald Trump's tweets and this statement go to the same thing. They're creating a story that doesn't exist. To Chris's point, no one said the meeting, it was a secret dinner. No one said they were trying to hide it. All that it was said is this wasn't known, and by my definition, obviously this is flexible, but brief is not almost an hour long. Brief is a minute long. The second thing is, yes, presidents talk to world leaders. Of course, they have phone calls. At a thing like the G20, they have conversations, but this isn't just any world leader. Right. This is the guy who, according to the FBI, CIA, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, was involved in a detailed and, frankly, somewhat successful meddling in the United States elections. This is not, Trump said, I talked to Macron. Well, France and the United States have a different relationship than the United States and Russia. And not recognizing that difference is another part of the problem.
See, I just think that why can't the President of the United States do a real press conference where he takes all these questions on Russia? Why can't he talk about, what his vision for a relationship with Russia is actually like, where they cooperate, where they're going to disagree. Bring us in on this instead of saying, well, this is another. I mean, I don't care if he wants to, spend all that time with Macron in Paris and be as affectionate as a dad would be on his bar mitzvah day with his son as he was with Macron. That's all fine. But here with Putin, if you're going to strike this rapport, then there's going to be real questions given what Russia's done.
Well, but so you have a cycle here, right? And that's what this story is really about, is this extension of a lack of transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't he have the press conference? Because he doesn't like the questions.
Yeah.
So he tries to shade the reality on this and call it fake whenever he can. Why is it relevant? Because of what we're learning about the Don Jr. meeting and the eighth person. This eighth guy who was at the meeting, we'll talk about him, but it's the fact that we didn't know he existed.
Right.
And there's a continuing problem with this story. For those who are saying, what's the big deal? It's that it's been too difficult to find out about who was at this meeting and what it was about. And now the eighth guy winds up being connected to the Agalarovs, but he has his own history that makes him a little bit suspicious to be sitting with the son of the president.
Yeah, I mean, even in the context of his business with the Agalarovs, he's been connected to money laundering to the tune of more than $1 billion. So, I mean, no one here seems to be, a saint in the context of the Russian folks they're meeting with. But here's the TikTok. There was no meeting. The meeting was about adoption. The meeting was just a handful of people, and it's all a terrible misunderstanding. Actually, it was between 8 people, including the top members of the campaign, with emails that are verified that show there was an offer of dirt on Hillary Clinton from a foreign power, denied absurdly by the White House in a press conference, because it's there for everyone to see, and now an 8th individual. And so this keeps getting worse because they have not been transparent from the start.
Okay, so that leads us to what is upcoming, Crystalisa, and that is that there are reports that Robert Mueller has given the all clear for Don Jr. and Manafort to testify in front of Congress in public. That's great for us who like transparency and are interested in this, but why is Bob Mueller letting them testify in public? What's his rationale?
Yeah, I find that interesting. My initial take on it, not being a lawyer or a member of the criminal justice system, is that this probably means that he has gotten what he needs either from them or about them, and is not worried about a public testimony getting in the way of the investigation that he is running. It would be, obviously, I think, beneficial to David's point. I think it would be beneficial for these things to be held in public. The biggest issue tied to the Russia story, John mentioned this, is we just keep getting different stories. The July 9th, 2016 meeting is the best example. June 9th, rather, is the best example of that. But we just keep hearing different things. And this latest, this sidebar with Putin, whatever you want to call it, is just one in a number of ways in which it feels as though the story shifts based on what we find out, not from the Trump administration, but what we wind up finding out from reporting. So I think it would behoove the public right to know, as well as, frankly, the Trump administration. Let's remember, Donald Trump has called this investigation a witch hunt and a total hoax, among other things that he's called it. Yeah. It would be in his interest, if he believes that if that is true, it is in his interest to have all these major players testify in public, because in his mind, there is nothing to hide here. So he should show it, shine some light on it. And that's the opposite of what's been done.
They have not told the truth about what's gone on with Russia. Yeah. Therefore, if I'm covering the president, as I am, I'm suspicious of that meeting with Putin. I want to know what they talked about. I want to know what this president is doing to actually push back against Russia. He's been coddling Russia. And I thought we had a major American party in this country, the Republicans, who were pretty tough on the idea of Russia and the former Soviet Union. And now the head of the Republican Party, who's the president of the United States, appears not to be. I want to know more about that. And no, I'm sorry, I don't take them at their word that it was just a couple of guys getting together, forming a better relationship.
Well, before President Trump, you had the two most outspoken critics of Russia and its president right now in Congress belonging to his party, Lindsey Graham and John McCain, Republican senators. Just quick point of law, Bob Mueller has no right to tell Congress who they can have come before it. You could argue legally, in terms of their jurisdiction, that Congress has every bit as much, if not more, right to invite people. So this is about deference. This is about accommodation. Mueller doesn't need to tell Congress who can come before.
Does he decide which one can be closed door and which one can be public?
No. I mean, Congress has its own jurisdiction. What they're trying to do is negotiate who
Right.
does what, because the special counsel
So-
has this criminal jurisdiction.
But he has a strong hand in that
He
negotiation,
does, but
Chris. I'm not saying he's.
This is about deference. They don't need his permission
But
necessarily.
he's giving the green light that it's okay with me.
But
It sounds
if he
like.
said this would be really bad if
Right.
he did this
Then
in
they
open session, I'm trying to
probably-
lean on.
You know, it's a concern.
Last year, protests and threats of boycotts erupted over a similar